So, is people pleasing making you sick? One of the things I've observed with a lot of the women that I've worked with that have autoimmune is this inability to say no. And I did a post a little while ago on Facebook around this exact observation and saying there is a link between our inability to say no and being the good girl, which is what I call good girl syndrome, and autoimmune, particularly thyroid autoimmune, because the thyroid is at our throat chakra, and that communication and our ability or inability to speak up. And if this is blocked, then often this will manifest as, I see this as, thyroid conditions, particularly autoimmune. And so there is this stat that it's about around 80% of autoimmune disorders are impacted by women, or women, however I want to word that. 80% of autoimmune disorders are with women. And it's like, okay, why is that? Like, why are more women getting autoimmune? And what I have observed with the women I am working with, is this good girl syndrome, this inability to say no. And so some of the common patterns are inability to rest, always doing, pressure to do it all and to do it perfect, and inability to say no and avoid saying no, always saying yes, like not being able to say no, thank you, that's not for me, I don't want to do that. Also, reluctance or inability to ask for help, feeling like they've got to do it all on their own, being very much in the masculine, or the masculine energy of get it done, hyper independent woman, suppressing their own needs and emotions, which then ultimately manifests as physical illness. And so I experienced this firsthand with my kidney, which was a kidney tumor. But this was me suppressing my emotion, and my body was speaking to me in whispers for a long time before it actually started to yell. And then it got so loud that I had this tumor in my kidney, and essentially the tumor that I had burst and like had a blood vessel burst and expanded and bled internally, and I had to get my kidney removed. And this part of this, and I know deep down in my heart, a big part of this was my suppressed emotion and unresolved trauma that actually manifested as a kidney tumor. And I just know that intuitively. And now, since then, the work that I have done on understanding the connection between mind, body, emotions, trauma, how that manifests as physical symptoms, that I just know that to be true. In my body, it was suppressed. I was suppressing emotion. I didn't know how to use my voice. I didn't know how to speak up. I had a lot of things that I wanted to say, and they were trapped in my body. And so there are consequences of not setting boundaries. There are consequences for us for not being able to speak up. Because if we don't set boundaries or ask for our needs to be met, eventually our body will set them for us through the form of illness, right? And that was my experience. And this always saying yes and neglecting our own needs, which is self-abandonment, or also known as fawning, where you're like, yes, I will discard, self-abandon my own needs and put everyone else's needs first, leads to this, over time, your body does it for you because it's so exhausting saying yes to everything when you don't want to. And you feel the guilt and the inability to sit with guilt and the pain, and feeling guilty for not being everything for everyone. And you're just completely draining your own tank. Yes. And it is exhausting because your adrenals are constantly under the pump, and that high level of cortisol, which is what I call the background alarm, the parts of us that are always on. Because where does this come from? Well, when I was a kid, when we were little, that was demonstrated to me by my mother, by my grandmother, through the lineage of where did it come from? Well, my mother learnt it from her mother, who learnt it from her mother, who learnt it from her mother. And that is demonstrated back through the lineage. There may have been trauma that was not even your mother's, was not yours, but it's been passed down to you. And that intergenerational trauma can impact our ability to speak up, ability to ask for help, the beliefs that we have about ourselves. And most of these have been implanted into our subconscious before the age of 7, because we look at the world and our caregivers and look at how they're interacting with the world and create beliefs as a result of watching mum and watching dad and our primary caretakers interact with the world. And so if we saw mum who gave and always put everyone first and didn't look after her own self, didn't fill her own cup because she thought it was selfish and was driven by guilt and shame, we then take that on. We take that story on and we adopt it as our own. And then we also have this inability to say no, and have to always feel like we're the good girl. And this is also like, just be a good girl. And if my emotions were made wrong and I wasn't allowed to express myself and I just had to comply to fit in, to feel loved. And so I learned to adapt and change myself in order to receive love, in order to fit in, because we are herd animals and we are wired that way to fit in. Otherwise, what happens when you're a herd animal and you don't fit in is you get kicked out of the herd. And that is terrifying and could potentially mean death. And so we learn when we're little, because most of us did not have parents who could emotionally regulate themselves or knew how to deal with their emotions. And we suppressed our own emotions and we watched it demonstrated to us. And it was also taught to us on an unconscious level that it wasn't okay to have big emotions and we need to be a good girl and not to speak up and just do what you're told. All of those things, which then results in us as an adult feeling exhausted and burnt out and feeling like we've got to do it all. Add on top of that the culture of modern women then moving out of like having a role that is staying at home and looking after the family, to going and having a career and working, but also still having to do all the same things that they did previously, adds on their stress load. And if we can't then say no or ask for help, then there's problems. Right. And so that's then when it starts to manifest as physical symptoms. Now, I'm not going to say that this is the only driver of autoimmune. And I'm talking in a lot of context because I work with a lot of women with thyroid conditions, and a lot of those are autoimmune. I'm talking more in the context of the type of people I work with. But all autoimmune, I see this, but particularly with women with thyroid autoimmune, it's really prevalent. If you've heard of any Gabor Mate, who is a psychotherapist who talks about this, he talks about this as well, like women's inability to say no and how that manifests as an autoimmune condition. And it's what I've observed with the clients that I'm working with, and there is this common thread. And the difference between someone who hasn't got autoimmune and does have autoimmune is like that inability to say no and set boundaries is like on another level with the autoimmune clients, because it's like more deeply ingrained. And so I think women in general, as my own personal experience and the women that I'm working with, is we've got to learn to use our voice to heal our trauma. We need to go into our wounds and heal our lineage and heal those beliefs and patterns and the traumas that were created for us as a kid, as through experiences of not feeling safe and not feeling seen and heard and feeling invalidated. And it could have been I didn't feel safe emotionally, or I didn't physically feel safe, or there was some sort of experience where I wasn't safe. It doesn't matter where you are in the spectrum, it's still embedded in your system. And that if that's not released, that then will have an effect. But this part of it is a really big key part of not the people pleasing, the fawning, that I need to keep doing, and I have to please everyone, and I worry what other people are going to think, and I can't let people down. And then it manifests also in, for example, in dating and in relationships and in marriages around, I can't speak up. I can't really ask my needs to be met. I can't say no. I have to feel like I always have to be nice, right? But this pattern behavior, just remember, it didn't start with you, okay? So it's also not your fault. It's also not your mother's fault. It's also not your lineage fault. It's like this has been passed down from generation to generation. And so we actually need to, first of all, learn to listen to our bodies. And we need to learn to pause. And filling your own cup, which is the same as when you get on the plane and you're in the emergency aisle and they say you must put your own oxygen mask first, is what we actually need to learn to do with our own nervous systems to create safety in our body and to look after ourselves. Because there's also this belief that it's selfish for me if someone is a mother, particularly, or it's in women in general, that it's selfish for me to put my own needs first, and I have to put everyone else first, and then I eat last. But that's not how it works. You need to put your own oxygen mask on first. Now we hear about that, but we actually then don't know what it means to actually do that, because putting your own oxygen mask on first isn't going and having a bubble bath and doing your nails. Putting your own oxygen mask on first is I've got to get into my body and feel my feelings, and I have to learn to create safety in my body. How do I do that? I do that by talking to your inner child parts, teaching people how to feel your feelings and emotions and get into the body and really feel it, and learning to integrate those parts. Now, the other part that I really just want to touch on is this is not the only part of autoimmune, right? There's the biochemical aspect, the chemical, nutritional deficiency, gut health, inflammation. All of those things load the gun, but stress often will pull the trigger. And often there can be a stressful event before it gets activated in your system, but it can also be happening for a long time before it actually gets picked up. But this learning to fill your own cup is an important part of the process, learning to be uncomfortable with what people think about you and learning to love yourself unconditionally, regardless of how they act, because it doesn't mean that you're bad or unworthy. And this level of this deep belief of unworthiness that needs to be addressed and needs to be slowly healed over time, which doesn't just happen like that. The way that happens is you learn the tools to connect to yourself, and then you actually bit by bit actually you keep chipping away, and over time you've moved 1 degree every day, and then all of a sudden, like, you've moved in a year's time, you've moved 360 degrees, right? So this is the learning to fill your own cup, reconnect with yourself, and also remembering that these tools, it's very hard to learn these tools purely on your own. You've all got blind spots. And so having someone to guide you through that, because you can't see your own blind spots. And when we have someone to guide us and mirror back to us what's going on, it is a lot easier to also make progress. The other thing that I find really powerful is learning because part of this journey is, okay, first of all, if I've been, say, diagnosed with autoimmune, you might be listening to this and going, yeah, I know, that's totally me. Like, yes, I can't say no to things. It stresses me out. I've got too much on my plate. I'm actually exhausted, but you don't know how to even say no. You've got to learn to have this as a process. So step one is learn to connect to yourself and work through those parts and those unworthiness parts so you can say no. But the other tool that I found really powerful is actually to create space between the reaction time, like between the question, the stimulus, and the response. Meaning, if someone asks something of me, you don't have to actually respond straight away. You can take a moment and say, may I get back to you on that? Or let me feel into that and get back to you. Because on the journey, when you first start this and you realize you're like, oh my God, I don't know how to say no. I don't know how to set my boundaries. Boundaries actually do need to be set as a no. As you learn and integrate yourself and you start to develop and mature and evolve in terms of self-worth, you then a boundary is not like a no. Like sometimes we think boundaries are like a full fence and I've got to set my boundaries, and you push everyone away. Okay, at first, sometimes that's what needs to be done, because you need to then rest and repair and recover and cocoon. It's like go into hibernation, into your winter, and heal. and let everything settle. And sometimes you do need to create that space to do that. And that has to start out as going, no, 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 no. But over time, what happens is that you actually do have the ability to realize, actually, a boundary isn't really just saying no. It's actually just being like, that doesn't feel right for me. Honoring what your body says. Is it a full fuck yes? Is it a full fuck no? But also asking for your needs to be met and sharing how you're feeling and learning to repair and being true to yourself, and keep tuning in and learning to reconnect to yourself and come home to yourself again and again and again and again. And as you do that, then speaking up and sharing what's coming up for you and making a request and allowing yourself to receive and being able to receive support and help, which ultimately means being more in your feminine, because when you're in that do, you're also very much in your masculine energy. And that is exhausting. We both have two energies, feminine and masculine. Everyone has two in it, but we have one that is going to be innate to us, which is either masculine or feminine. And a masculine is a very different energy to a feminine. Masculine is doing, get stuff done, completion, support, protection, provide, breadwinner, make the money, do the things, get the stuff done. We need that energy, but also being in your feminine is receiving and being creative and life force and dance and flow, and there's no end point. It's the way that I describe it is masculine is the rock and the water is the feminine, which is the water flowing around the rock. It doesn't ever end. Yeah. And so when we're constantly in that masculine energy, it's exhausting to be on and always have to do. And we need to create balance, right? And so part of that balance is being able to receive and being able to actually accept help and ask for help and receive compliments and support and love, and let all of those beautiful joyous emotions and receive life into my world because I'm worthy of that, and that dynamic and letting that in. But first of all, a lot of the time it's got to be, no, I actually have to be like, no, push away. And what is helpful is that learning to listen to your body, but as you're going through that process, creating space. So may I get back to you on that? Let me feel into that and get back to you, and giving yourself time to feel into that, because our body also always has a yes and a no. So if you can muscle test this, muscle test is kinesiology, and it's like my body is a yes and my body is a no, and I get my clients to do this. Okay, show me a yes. So yes in your body, and I try and put my hands together, show me yes, and it's really strong. Show me a no. And there's a different level of weakness. What happens is my fingers start to show me no. It hasn't got the tightness, the grip that the yes does. You can muscle test it if you're holding your hand out. You can look this up, and you push down and push no. You can muscle test things, foods, all sorts of stuff. It's really interesting. But it's really tuning into, when does my body tell me yes? When does it tell me no? And you can actually go back, and a really good way to do this is to go, okay, when were there times that my intuition told me, no, that's not a good idea, and I didn't listen? And really getting into your body and feeling and going, okay, how did that show up? Where was the sensation in my body? What did that feel like? And then when was it a yes? And I listened to it, when I didn't listen to it, and you can go through that and you'll list them. And I learned this the hard way by many, many, many times, particularly in relationship, of not listening to my intuition and ignoring it. And I had to go through, when I was going through a really big breakup, of what's all the times that I didn't listen to my intuition telling me something was off or something wasn't right, or that I didn't want to do that, or that wasn't the right decision, or whatever the thing. And I had pages and pages and pages of all the times I didn't listen. And I got really tuned into what was a yes and what was a no. How does my intuition come through me when it is a fuck yes and when it is a no? And what does that look like? I still miss it. There's still times when I miss it. My intuition is really fast. If you're into human design, I'm a projector. I've got a splenic authority. If you don't know what that means, don't worry about it. but it means my intuition comes really fast and it's like lightning and then it's gone. And other people's intuition, and I only really realized this because I was like, yeah, your intuition. I used to be coaching people and realize actually, yeah, your intuition comes and you can feel it. And other people were like, no, but my intuition doesn't come that way. And when I learned about human design, I realized actually people's intuition does come differently and shows up differently in the body. So you've got to learn to do that. If you want to go down the human design rabbit hole, I highly recommend, but it is a whole another world. But just learning what your intuition or your authority is really helpful. And so it's like, okay, well, how does that show up in my body? And if it shows up really quick, then the practice is I actually then have to learn to start to speak that. And immediately, if I'm used to, and it's wired in my system to not be able to say yes, not to be able to say no or to say yes, sorry, I have to create space for myself to then be able to grow that muscle of saying yes or no when it's right for me and really listening to that. The other thing to remember is you can also change your mind. And people don't forget this and think once they say yes, then they have to stick to it and blah, blah. You can actually go, actually, I've just felt into this. I just want to say it's probably not right for me. And you can totally go back and say, no, I fell into it. And then we also have this story that we can't do that. We're going to let people down. There's all the stories around that. And sitting in the discomfort of that. And can I sit in the discomfort of the guilt and the shame if I say no and let someone down, and realizing it doesn't make it mean that I'm not good enough or that I'm less than. And we've got to start to tend to those parts and talk to those parts, because these are the parts that need to be seen and heard and witnessed. That was a big long story, but it's just so important. And so there is so many nuances of that. But if there is things that I have said in this dialogue, this conversation around speaking up, saying no, listening to your intuition, knowing that you may have that habit of not being able to say no and saying yes to everyone and just fawning and self-abandoning, please comment below. Let's keep the conversation going. If you want to further this conversation and would like to see what it looks like to work with me, reach out to me. You can go to my website and book in a free health assessment with me, which is just a conversation around what that could look like. If you're struggling with autoimmune and what I'm saying resonates, because the way that I work when I work with people is I work with the biochemistry, which is looking at all the things, environmental, health, what do we need for our biochemistry to work well, but also what's happening with our emotions and our nervous system, and what is our body telling us and what's our heart telling us, and how do we start to live to that and start to listen to our hearts more. And we've got to work through the wounding to be able to allow that to become through and become a lot clearer, and then ultimately live a life that is really a lot more inspiring and a lot more fulfilling and purposeful. So I'll leave that conversation there. Please don't be afraid to reach out. Don't be a stranger, and I will see you all soon. Okay.